All right, Assalamu alaikum. We just wanted to welcome everybody to ICGC's Civic Engagement Program. Today's topic is the why and how of civic board engagement. Our panel today includes myself, Shabana, and Shakila, and we will talk respectively about what our involvement has been with boards and how we can train all of the community to get involved both on civic boards, and then we'll sort of bring it back into some like other ways of board involvement like nonprofit and corporate boards as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Shabana to let her just give a brief overview.
Assalamu alaikum, Shabana Ahmed, Tours and Talks Chair, as well as appointed board member recently at the Islamic Center. Thank you so much for having this discussion. As you all know, in the past, our civic engagement series has been a lot about politics and how to be more involved, but this is more at the grassroots level, and this is, I think, a subject that most of us don't know about, which is why Samina Suhail, Zeba Malik, and myself, and 4 or 5 other members of the community attended this appointed 101 course at the Women's Fund. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a really quick overview on how to go about getting to know more about the boards, how to be more involved in these boards, and actually, hopefully, inshallah, be on a board. So we're going to first talk about what are the boards, what boards are there, how do you get more involved into the boards, and most importantly, why is it important for us to be on these boards? So in the first topic, what? There are, you would be surprised how many boards are out there. There are different types of boards, including nonprofit boards, corporate boards. When we attended this workshop, I've never even heard of some of these boards. So basically there's a board out there for everyone. And Zeba will elaborate on this in the presentation here today. Now, how do you get started? This is the hardest part for most people. And we always, what we learned is basically, what is your interest? What's your passion? What gets you excited? But for me, it wasn't just that. It was also what bothered me. What do I want to make better? And how do I help make something better or find a solution for a problem? So those are the kinds of things that you should start thinking about when you start looking out for what boards to join. And again, we'll provide those resources for you here today. The most important thing is why. Why is this so important? Why are we here today talking about being more involved into these boards? And I always tell people another issue is our community likes to complain. So there's a lot of complaints about things, why things aren't getting done. And here's a way to take care of some of those problems. And most importantly, Muslim Americans need to be more visible. They need to find a space for themselves at that table. And I think what most people don't understand is that policy is made at the local level. It's not something that starts at the top. So something right here in your community, in your county, you could be making these important changes that you feel passionate about. I really just want to close with one thing about these boards, and I think this is what really stops us from participating in these boards. I feel that a lot of us are intimidated by these boards, and we shouldn't be. You don't have to have a social standing in the community. You don't have to have an income level. Anyone who has basically time and that passion, this is a way for you to participate and make a change in your community. So I'm gonna give it to Zeba, and she's gonna go ahead and present to you some of those resources where you can get started.
Okay, so on this slide, if you could put it in presentation mode, great. So first, I just wanted to thank the Women's Fund and specifically their appointed program. As Shabana mentioned, many of us attended that program last year, and with their blessing, we were able to use a lot of their material. Their goal was to see more female representation in civic boards, but along that lines, we just need to have more Muslim representation, as Shabana was indicating. So we're going to go through some of the basics. Public boards are where members are appointed by a government official, compared to what we normally know of as elected boards, where you put in ballots and you elect people. There are also not a nonprofit or corporate board, which Shakila will mention a little bit differently later on. And members are just volunteers because they're doing a public service. So you're really not getting paid in appointed boards, but you're doing something based on your passion and your interest, and along those lines. Next slide. So here's some differences of the boards that we've been mentioning. Okay, you can go ahead and put them all up. So as we mentioned, nonprofit boards, which many of us have been a part of, like I sit on some nonprofit boards, Shabana's been involved, Shakila's been involved, and I think that's what the community is used to. And a lot of that really, for me, I think about the difference is that you have to do a lot of fundraising for nonprofit boards. You have to go out there and get the donations and get those projects implemented. Whereas civic boards, the unique thing about it is that the money is already there from taxes and government programs and things like that. And you're really responsible for distributing that money in a fair way for your communities. Corporate boards, there's a more hierarchical structure for that. There's executive stakeholders and so forth. It's for profit. And so usually things are not as public in corporate boards. Next slide. So of the board categories, this is what we thought was really amazing. In the civic boards, and when we talk about civic boards, we're talking about, like, for example, Butler County, Warren County, those type of counties have their own boards. And if you look at these categories, it's just amazing that there are boards for each of these categories. For example, you would think of things like Parks and Recreation, education, mental health, but you wouldn't have thought of things like zoning or smaller things. We'll go on to another slide and it talks about like the micro minutia. But these are sort of broad categories if you're interested in arts and humanities or economic development, land use, those of you who are interested in codes and agricultural use of land. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. Next slide. So of those board categories, there's some specific ones listed. There's like a tree board in the city of Hamilton who are responsible for, the zoning of trees and how many trees are allowed in different areas. There's investment boards and tax levy boards. There's normal things that we think of like rural zoning commissions, urban design boards. There's the airport county board. And if you look here at other, there's smaller things like Civil Service Commission, fire district boards, things like that. So this is just a representation of the different type of categories of boards out there. Next slide. So here we're going to talk about like, how do we get started? The first thing really is to think about what is your talent or your passion. So for example, when people tell you that you're really good at something, what is that thing that they tell you that you're really good at? That it just may come naturally for you. It may be something that other people comment on, like, I really wish I was really organized or such a great speaker or something like that. And really, these are the three key things: is time, talent, and the passion. So you're going to try to find a board that fits your talents and passions and fits something that's in your stage of life. So if you're a young parent, maybe something that's very time intensive is not going to work. If you're a little bit further along in your career or you're close to retirement, then you may find things that can use a little bit more of that time. The other thing to find out about is, do those boards meet once a month? Is it quarterly? Sometimes boards only meet quarterly, which is really not a big time commitment. And usually, and this is in comparison to, like, for example, nonprofit boards, which actually are a little bit more time consuming. They may meet monthly or bi-monthly, and there's a lot more responsibility in that realm. Next slide. So I just want everyone to pause for a moment, grab a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, and just spend 2 minutes and just brainstorm what are your passions, like make a column or a little web of what your passions are and what your interests are. And again, like I mentioned, try to think about like, what do you like to do? What are you good at? What have others told you is your superpower? And just jot these things down for the next minute. So some things may be project planning. Do people really comment on the fact that you're very organized and able to pinpoint the endpoints in a project? Speaking, are you passionate about education and children's needs? What are those things that are effortless for you and amaze others? So hopefully now you have that list of 2 or 3 or 5 things that are really your interests and your superpowers. And I want you to keep that on the side while we go through the next few slides and sort of see where the match can be made there. Okay, so we just took that part of finding your passion, and we want to figure out how this all fits together. So usually when you're applying for a civic board, they're going to ask you like, why are you interested in being involved in here? So you want to kind of align your interest statement with your passion. And like I mentioned before, the nice thing about civic boards is that there's no financial obligation. You don't have to fundraise, you don't have to call people and try to collect money, but you do need to know a little bit about yourself and why your passions align with the mission of that civic board. And one thing that I want to bring out is sometimes people are afraid, like Shabana mentioned, it's really important to have Muslim representation. Don't be afraid to think that just because you're interested in a specific board that you have to represent the entire Muslim community, right? Like you don't want to hold yourself back because you're thinking, well, my interest in this is now a reflection of the entire Muslim community. Obviously, you're going to hold your ethics and standards up to, you know, what we as Muslims do, but don't feel like you can't do certain things because it's you're speaking for the whole community rather than just yourself. Next slide. So now that you're on the board, here's a few things to consider. What are the meetings like? So this is a little bit of research on your end, and the best way to do this, and we'll go into a few slides where we look and to find out when do these boards meet. But you're going to want to figure out what are the meetings like. Are there specific board roles? Do they have, you know, president of the board, vice president? Is it a formal meeting or informal meeting? Are they using like Robert's Law type things to go about their board meetings? Usually there's going to be an orientation of how to interact and how to avoid conflict on a board. And then usually there'll be some description of how long will you serve. Most of boards are 1 to 2 year commitments. It could be more or less depending on the board, and each one is different. Next slide. So here I wanted to go through how to find. So all I did is I typed in Butler County Civic Boards, and this is the first result that came down. So this is how you're going to go about finding where boards are, because as Shabana mentioned, we hadn't even heard about some of these boards, or that the fact that there was a place to find these. So here, the blue arrow on the top is that meetings. So I just clicked on meetings, and when I pulled down to that, it's you would hit on current board and commission openings, and that would tell you if any boards were open. Now, remember that a lot of times it's sort of like the insider club of who knows what board positions are available and what's not. And sometimes they will not be advertised. So that's one thing at this appointed meeting that Women's Fund put about was that you really need to do some due diligence and research if you're really interested in making an impact in that area, to find out when the boards meet, to kind of be there. Maybe you shadow 1 or 2 board meetings and you get a feel for like if you're qualified for this position, and then apply. A lot of times they'll just accept applications. So even if it says no current openings, they'll say if you're interested in a future opening, please submit a statement or your CV. And we'll go down further in this presentation and share some resources for that. But you can just submit that. And then when they are looking for someone, they have a list of people who are qualified for that position. Next slide. So here's the one for Warren County. Same thing, I just Googled Warren County, but here's where that blue arrow is pointing to where it says the commissioners are currently requesting individuals interested in filling vacancies to send a cover letter stating why they desire to be on that with a CV. So again, just align something simple as to why you're interested in that position and how it puts together your interests. Okay, next. So this is a little bit boards by county, and I hope everybody can see this clear enough. But so for example, we talked about those broad categories of transportation, land use, humanities. Within those categories, these are the actual boards that are there. So for example, on, let me look up here a bit. For example, there is radio advisory boards in Butler County, or there are criminal justice boards. There is a microfilm board, and for those of you who don't know, microfilm is how they archive like newspapers and things like that. So it's really like the most nuanced things there's a board for. And again, you're there to help, you know, align that to the mission of that board. So other things, so this was really important, I thought, is hopefully you guys can take a look or screenshot this slide and really go through each of these boards. So for example, if you're interested in mental health or disabilities, there's a board for that. There really is a board for anything that you can imagine, right? There's a fair board, library law resource board member. It's just a variety of things. Next slide. So the other thing that is important that sort of ties into this is school boards. For those of you who really have a passion for education, or now, you know, this whole COVID has led to this remote learning and differences in implementation of educational standards, there are school boards within each county. And the school boards, you know, we can hand this to those who are interested. It's a little bit more detailed. There is a certain more hourly per week of work to do. But it's for those people who really are interested in making an impact in the equity of education within our communities. Next slide. And then Smina, this might need to be, yep, go ahead and put those in. So on this slide, the first thing is attend one of the meetings of the board you're interested in. And at those meetings, you then network and just talk to people, like let people know that you're there, you want a seat at the table, you're interested. You don't have to be 100% qualified. I think most women, they hold themselves back from applying to things because they don't think they're like 100% qualified. Whereas like, I think the stat is that men apply even when they're like 70% qualified for a position. So the same way, I think the Muslim community really needs to show up and find some places. And then once you join your community or neighborhood council, you can think about taking more leadership role in those. And really just find, when you go back to those lists of 2 or 3 passions or interests that you had, find a few of those things, show up, have a seat at the table, raise your hand, and be involved. So I want to next hand it over to Shakila to talk a little bit about her personal experiences on her various boards, as well as hopefully answer some questions about time commitment, and then maybe lastly lend some insight into what boards she knows of that are currently recruiting or looking for representation. Shakila?
Great. Thank you so much. I assume I'm unmuted. So I think Zeba did an excellent job of kind of walking through some of the details. But, you know, a lot of you may still have questions. So let me just start off. And Shabana did a great job of kind of setting the stage as to why your voice matters. Your voice and your seat at the table will have an impact on the decisions that are made in order to improve or, you know, take away from your quality of life, your family's quality of life, and your community's quality of life. And so it's imperative that you understand is that your engagement absolutely does make a difference. And I can count many times where I being at the table when conversations were happening, you know, help to educate people and enlighten people, and so they can be informed in order to make better decisions. You know, sometimes I'm not really sure who's on, so I expect is that some of you may be extremely experienced in serving on a board, whether it be an appointed board, an elected board. I don't know if there's anybody out there serving on a for-profit board, but those are boards which are highly structured. They usually look for people, and I'll kind of work backwards. They look for people with, you know, obviously business leadership experience in order to come in from an advisory and a guidance perspective, as the slide that Zeba shared with you. And quite often you get paid for for-profit boards. The meetings are scheduled way in advance, and you know, have to make that commitment, and you may need to fly to another city in order to fulfill the commitment, or a for-profit board. In terms of nonprofit boards that I've served on, they've fallen into two categories. They've either been advisory boards or they've been fiduciary boards. And so you need to be aware as to what type of a board it is that, particularly in the nonprofit world, whether it's an advisory or fiduciary. So for example, I currently serve on the University UC Health Advisory Board, and it is, it does not have any fiduciary responsibilities. They have another small board responsible for fundraising and so on and so forth, but this is for them to be able to get input from diverse leaders within the community in order to make more informed decisions, as well as it's a two-way process, is that information is shared, so then I can share it with the diverse communities that I'm involved in. The Festival of Faith Steering Committee is an advisory board, and so you know, I serve on a couple of national boards. The Muslim Jewish Advisory Council is very much an advisory council, and so does programming and other things, but we may help some with fundraising, but primarily it's to really to bring people together from our diverse communities and to celebrate our contributions, and to also have an impact on hate crimes, laws, and efforts that would benefit the minority communities. As far as fiduciary boards, a couple of the fiduciary boards that I have are, you know, I served on the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati, and we had a big responsibility. I'm emeritus board chair, and I think you never really retire from a board at a place of worship, but you have responsibility for fundraising, as well as guiding the organization's strategic vision and mission, and helping to, you know, implement, especially in organizations that may not be as highly structured, to get the work done. The University of Cincinnati Foundation is kind of a hybrid model where you have responsibility for fundraising, but at the same time, you are there as advisors and guidance for the way that the donations coming into the University of Cincinnati are, you know, spent, and making sure that we reach the diverse communities and engage people that perhaps haven't been engaged. Very quickly, and Zeba, just raise your hand when you want me to wind it down, because I could talk forever about this. Obviously, I have a passion for this topic, and I have recruited many people and will encourage many people to get involved because of the impact that you can make. And so, you know, maybe start by serving on a committee. Some of you may, you know, be on PTOs right now. When I was working full-time for IBM, I didn't have too much time. I was, you know, having my little ones and, you know, working full-time. So, you know, I would volunteer at the schools. I would maybe serve on small board and such. And then when I transitioned to helping run, you know, our own medical practice, I felt like I had much more flexibility. And then began by working in the health and education space because that's what I was most comfortable with at that time, but utilizing my professional experience in those spaces. From there, then, as Zeba said, you begin to kind of find your passion. Is that, you know, without really articulating it, I had a passion for bringing people together of diverse faiths, making sure Muslim Americans were at that table when those tables of decision making. And so getting involved, committing to the work at the Islamic Center was an excellent fit. From there, I went to the National Council of Christians and Jews that became eventually Bridges for a Just Community, and it's still doing work through the Festival of Faiths. So I think as you evolve, you realize both in terms of what your passion is and where you want to contribute. And sometimes you know, Zeba's absolutely right. I don't recall any time that I've said, I want to be on this board and I go and lobby for it. I mean, it just so happens that, you know, people have always approached me, but don't be afraid to reach out because sometimes they may not know you. But I remember that a couple of the boards that I served on, because I did not feel I had the expertise, but because they really wanted, I think, a voice at the table that would educate them on a diverse perspective and add to their programming and because of requests by friends and colleagues, I joined the Cincinnati Preservation Association board for probably 6-7 years. And then I also joined the Ohio Humanities Council, which is a statewide board. And so, you know, sometimes if you're out there doing good work, people reach out to you for something that you are not, you know, necessarily going to seek out because you don't have the direct experience. But I found in both of those situations, my voice at the table and my ability to take a leadership role in whatever events or programming absolutely did make a difference. And then from there, I recommended Ali Manai to serve on that board, who has a very diverse background than I do. He's a engineer, a scientist, and yet he's a poet. And, you know, he can bring that perspective. So you also begin to see who else within the community can be involved. And so lastly, what I would say is that, you know, if I just, I don't have a list, and that's why it's important that maybe Zeba, we can provide our emails or contact information for ways to people to reach out if they want to talk to each of us about the different boards that we've served on and how it is they might be able to get involved. But I know, for example, some of the boards I serve on that are looking for active contributing voices. And yes, a lot of the nonprofits do want you to make a financial commitment. It doesn't have to be the same commitment for everyone. You know, either you give or you get, whatever it is that's possible for you to support the organization. But for example, the YWCA does incredible work for empowering women and eliminating racism. That is an area the Cincinnati Regional Coalition Against Hate very much wants to have people get engaged. And then eventually I serve on their executive committee, is that we would look for people to take on those particular roles. We are looking to start a Muslim Jewish Advisory Regional Council. And so, yes, it's uncomfortable for a lot of us to be in those spaces, but I cannot say enough that being at the table is much, much better than just being on the menu and getting eaten alive, because if you're not there, decisions are made for you and voices are being made for you or being expressed on your behalf as well. So I think what I might do is stop for a little bit and allow us to maybe, you know, engage in some discussion and add whatever it is that you think is important for us to also share.
Okay, so thank you, Shakila, for your topic and for your explaining how you've been involved. I do want to bring back again the distinction between civic board and nonprofit. So a lot of what Shakila has mentioned is nonprofit work, and that does require a little bit more time commitment, wouldn't you say, Shakila? As well as financial, usually you have to fundraise to some extent. And remember, the stuff that we presented at the beginning is really civic boards, which there is a lot of people like me, I hate fundraising. So I'm leaning towards more things that don't require me to fundraise. So, you know, you can look back at that. There is a question, don't you have to be a resident of a city or particular county to be eligible for these public boards? And I believe on the civic boards, that's correct. However, as Shakila was alluding to, a lot of the corporate and nonprofit boards, you're not limited to a particular city. It could be a greater Ohio type thing. Is that, what would you say, Shakila?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, I mean, if decisions are being made for a local region, we want people in Butler County or people in Westchester to go to the township meetings, to go to the zoning meetings. And if nothing else, you will be so much more informed in making your decisions and illuminating those that you're in contact with. And so I think, you know, with the grace of God, praise to God, is that we have people that from our community, just for an example, and there may be people from other communities listening in as well, is that people are all over the city. We don't live in one particular place. And so it's really important for you to look at Warren County, Hamilton County, City of Cincinnati, and there I sit on the Compass Cincinnati board, which is an appointment, that is one civic board I sit on, Zeba, and that was an appointment by Mayor Cranley. And so I don't live in the city of Cincinnati, but they realize is that the collaboration with our very heavily populated northern suburbs in order to improve the life of immigrants and new Americans is critical. So someone like myself can very much engage in that particular City of Cincinnati board.
Smita, I'm going to ask you to go to the last slide. We have one more slide, and just wanted to give some of the resources or some comments here about how, you know, what are the resources available. So the first thing I would say is for everyone to go to the appointed website and sign up. They have newsletters where they let you know about trainings and possibly openings. And within our community, we have sort of a network of mentors and coaches that can help you with resume development, help you to get those important roles that you may not see the connection of in terms of leadership and in terms of diversity, and helping to use that for your civic board application. As well, we can do some interview coaching to help you with that. And so if you just reach out to the civic engagement team, we can help with that. And I wanted to see if there's any additional questions, or Shabana, if you wanted to come back and add anything else.
No, I think Shakila did a great job of clarifying a lot of these questions I think people have about these different boards. And what I reiterated earlier is, I think, again, I think as Muslim Americans, besides just having that seat at the table, is not to feel intimidated. You have a voice, you live in this country. When people ask me, and I'm sure Shakila and Zeba, you have the same thing, why do you do what you're doing? What, you know, the time that you spend, doing the work that we do. And I always say the same thing. Don't you want your children to have an easier and better life here? You want them to still fight those same battles that we're fighting here today? And rather, I would have my children focus on other things that are just as important or even more important than worrying about these smaller ones that we're still trying to, work at. So I really encourage, anyone that's out there or, interested in this, but like I said, but feel a little held back. Don't feel that way. Just put your toe in the water, get started. You'll find, like Shakila said, that sometimes people will come to you when they see that your interest and your passions and something that you're bringing to the table would be really important for them. So,
right.
And I think, just very quickly to springboard off of that is that, so, I think a couple of things that are really important is that, that whatever it is that you're going to do it for the right reason. Yes, you have a passion, but be sincere. Don't think that it's a checklist that you want. I mean, unfortunately, I've been on enough boards where you see people who just want to say, I've done this, or I have this position or that position. Be sincere, because people will immediately be able to see through it. And so, be committed, be sincere, and whatever you're going to do the best job at it. So, just because it's, for example, University of Cincinnati is a nonprofit. Westchester Hospital I serve on is a nonprofit. I'm going on to the Xavier University, which is a nonprofit board, but they're all executives, and that bring a level of professionalism. Doesn't mean they're any better than I am because they're a CEO of a company, but they bring a level of professionalism and commitment. And that's really what I would stress to anyone interested. There will be a seat for you at the table, but be sincere, be committed, and do the best job that you can.
That's a great reminder. Sometimes people look at, like, let me just check off something to add to my CV. And okay, if it does help in that in some way, fine. But really, what is your intention as a Muslim? We should always keep that forefront and really check. For Minna, we always tell the Minna kids, like, check your intention. The minute you walk, your ego out the door and check your intention. So that's really important. There is another question someone's asked is, where can we have the greatest impact as Muslim Americans, on civic boards or nonprofit boards? Shakila and Shabana, I'll let you guys answer, and then I'll give my input.
What do you think, Shabana?
I would first say civic boards, but I think we're definitely lacking on the corporate boards. As you mentioned earlier, Shakila, we don't have enough representation there. So maybe anyone that is working currently right now in, let's say, P&G, GE, the local companies that are here in Cincinnati, these are, great assets to have to join these corporate boards and, put your face and voice on there. And I also just want to add that sometimes it could be a board that, I know we went back to, don't make it just all about you, and your intention should be good. So I was involved with LAD, which is a nonprofit organization that empowers adults with disabilities. And that was a selfish thing for me because I have a son with a disability, and I wanted to be more involved in that so that I could know what his options are for the future. It gives me personal information, and maybe even gives the resources that I probably would not have known about. So those are things that I want you to think about, that it's okay to sometimes do that. There's nothing wrong with that, as you mentioned, Zeba. But my personal opinion is, I think these civic boards, or the corporate boards, I think are really important right now. Shakila, I don't know if that's something you agree on.
No, I do not disagree with anything you've said. Those are spot on, and absolutely. I mean, that's your passion, Shabana. It's not selfish at all. That's your passion, and you are bringing a wealth of experience in doing everything that you've done for your son that other benefit as well from. So in regards to the three boards, I think we need people everywhere. And so I think we have enough talent, let's just say within our own community and many other communities that we partner with. But I think where we are lacking the most, I would say, are in the civic, and maybe that's just based on my experience, in the civic and the corporate boards. And so the corporate boards, I think some of our business leaders who have had executive level positions, I think they should cultivate their CVs. So perhaps, and that is something that you will kind of have to market yourself, is offer to be at the table for some of the for-profit boards, and, write letters to the CEO and offer your thoughts about, how a certain company could reach a particular market. So, I think that is an area where people who are not currently volunteering could have an impact and need to have an impact. In regards to the civic board, I think we're way behind. I mean, and especially in a region like Cincinnati. I mean, I don't think a week goes by where somebody asks me, when am I going to run for office? I'm like, do I look like I have a hole in my head? I mean, that's just not my cup of tea, but I can tell that that is a huge need, is that we need to begin to get involved in those civic boards so we can actually be there to represent the broader community and have that absolutely necessary and missing voice. So those are my thoughts on that.
I agree. I think the civic board, I mean, just by us going to the thing and not even knowing that there were civic boards available,
Yeah.
definitely the most underrepresented. And as Shabana had mentioned at the very beginning, that's where we do all the complaining as a community. Why don't we have this? Why isn't this a benefit for us, and things like that? And that's really where you can make the greatest impact.
Absolutely.
Another comment here is Muslims need to have a sometimes being executives at the board can be intimidating, especially if you're the only minority in the room. I've often been the only female. I'm a male-dominated specialty. So from the very beginning, even in college things, I was the only female. I think you just have to get over that. You really need to say, I'm here. And one of the things we train in our women in medicine type programs is don't be the only woman, bring another one with you. So it's not that just one Muslim on each board. There's no harm in bringing 2 or 3. And so whenever someone, and this is a great reminder, is whenever someone nominates you and you can't do it, you should give 2 or 3 other names of Muslims who can do it. And that is really the best way to bring our community forward. So every time someone asks you to do something, if you can't, give 2 or 3 other names of Muslims that can do it. And you know, we live in a society where you just have to be confident, and it's okay if you're the only minority, if you're the only woman, if you're the only Desi or the only Arab or whatever. That's part of showing up. Another comment is Muslims need to have a media presence. What board opportunities are there for that? Do one of you have a comment?
Yeah, so there was a period of time where I served on the WCET advisory board. So there are, you know, there's community advisory board for like WCPO and, you know, Channel 12. So absolutely, I think even before, you know, serving on the executive board, there are opportunities for people to, again, to be a voice at the table. So those are, you know, WCPO, you know, CET, the public PBS channel are 2 specifically that I know, and others have too. So I would just, you know, say, and we can help you. I'd be happy, you know, is write a letter or send an email to the station manager or to someone, you know, who is in charge of community engagement and say, I would love to be involved. Cincinnati Enquirer, years ago, I served on the, you know, the editorial board as a community voice. And then I nominated 2, 3 other people. And most recently, Samina Sohail, Dr. Samina Sohail, who's in charge of our education and part of this civic engagement team, served on the editorial panel as well. So, you know, I mean, there are things that are a better fit than others. You know, for the Enquirer, you need to be able, you should be able to write editorials and so on and so forth. And Samina's far better at it than I am. But nonetheless, yes, absolutely, there are opportunities to be engaged in the media boards. And if someone is particularly interested, I'd be happy to discuss with them further offline.
And I think another way to be involved is I sit on the Grey's Anatomy content board for ABC, as well as there's another thing, the smaller group called Hollywood Health and Society, that are always looking for like pitch lines from physicians. So whatever your particular passion or your career is, you can usually find media presence related to that, whether or not it's writing content or being on TV. They always need speakers in these categories. So again, once you find your passion or your niche or what you're interested in, I think that that's a way to also develop that. Go back to the chat here. Is there a way for ICG Civic team to look for these opportunities? Well, the best way is what we've indicated is go to your local county and just type in Warren County, Butler County Civic Board, and the lists are all there. Some of this we want everyone else to take ownership and leadership on. You know, we can't have like the same 12 people sitting on the same boards and doing all the work. So that's why we want to educate the community and really get involved in that way. And connects these opportunities. Okay, so someone's asking, can ICGC look for the opportunities and connect them to people in the community? Well, we're hoping that everyone takes responsibility, looks for those things, and raises their hand for those positions.
And Zeba, I just want to say, you know, if you're afraid to go by yourself, you know, to some of these public meetings, take somebody with you. Grab a couple of your girlfriends, you know, make it an evening.
Exactly.
Go to the meeting, go for coffee afterwards, you know, talk about it. So don't rely on, I mean, we'll help you as much as we can, but really, like Zeba said, you got to do your due diligence and find, like what she said, your passion, your interest for this. So.
Right. And, you know, I think also, I mean, I know I have reached out to many people in the past, but there may be, and you know, at the same time, when I recommend someone, my credibility is at stake. So I want to make sure that I have a little bit more information about you instead of just putting it out there. And, you know, and you may have a passion for it, but there's sometimes gradual steps that need to be taken to get to this one particular point. So I think if you've made a list of those passions and interests, and you know, you share them with us, I'm continuously updating in terms of areas where people can be engaged. And if I see your passion, I may think of something that I hadn't thought of. Like, I've been approached about arts boards, and, you know, I've referred a couple to Shabana. She is great at the Contemporary Arts Museum. I've been approached by the symphony or other, and, you know, even though I respect having the arts or the Playhouse in the Park, I've been asked to be involved in a number of things for them. There are other people that might be better suited. So if we know what your passion and interest is, it's kind of a two-way street that I think will make it work best.
So another question came up is, sometimes these civic board meetings meet during weekdays. How do working men and women pull this off? I can start off on this. If you first find out what board you're interested in, the timings on each of the county websites tells you exactly what time they meet. It is true that some of them do meet during weekday hours, but there are quite a few that actually meet weeknights. So that 6 p.m., 7 p.m. is a very common time that boards are meeting. And I think it just boils down to finding out how often they're meeting. If it's only quarterly, maybe you could take some time off work and try to attend that meeting. Or it goes back to, what stage of life are you in? If you can't get out of work during 9 to 5 hours, then you may need to look at some other opportunities, such as nonprofit boards that do tend to meet in the evenings or on weekends, or other committees that you could work on with your schedule.
And Zeba, I've been on a number of boards where I serve with a lot of professionals, executives, and so they tended to meet early in the morning, like a breakfast meeting, or alternate a breakfast meeting with a lunch meeting. And so if you know ahead of time, then you just schedule it as a luncheon meeting, or, you know, or an early morning meeting. And so, you know, there are many ways that can be accommodated for professionals. I wouldn't be afraid of that.
There is another comment that if we have enough people interested, we could do a board training 101 of do's and don'ts, etc. And I think all three of us are more, that's how we had originally envisioned this program before we had COVID and going remote and all of that. So I think that we're all up to doing something like that. Another question is, do we have a Muslim presence at racial justice initiatives such as Underground Railroad, Freedom Center, or other local coalitions?
We do, but much more is needed. And I think younger people are getting engaged. I was program chair, part of the executive committee at the Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Homa Yavar is serving on their board. The YWCA does incredible racial justice work. I've been involved. Danya's been involved. Zainab Schwen has been involved. You know, Boris Parker, whose family has been a part of this community, is involved. So we've had a young high school student, Aisha Chaudhry, who was one of the key organizers for the Mason Black Lives Matter protests and program, and did an incredible job. And she was featured actually at a national level through, I believe, NPR. So, but I will say that, and you know, Samina, myself, Shabana have spoken at many MLK programs and racial justice opportunities. But I think, you know, in order to make the systemic change that's needed, we need more people involved in that. Yusuf Munir is a young high schooler who's incredibly engaged in Black Lives Matter. And so, yes, but I think it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Great. Any other comments? So if people want to get in touch, they want to like raise their hands and say, we're interested in this, who do we approach? We can just have you call ICGC office and they can get those messages to us. Any other comments or questions from Shabana or Shakila? I want to thank everybody for their participation. The questions have been great. I hope that everyone is excited and rejuvenated and inspired to get out there and find out about these boards, to get some representation, and then come back and as a community, we can, you know, sort of talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, what can we do in terms of training to improve everyone's experiences. So we'd be happy to follow up on this if there's an interest.
Zeba, you want to just check the chat real quick to make sure we don't have any questions left?
Yep. And then we have one of the parents, Yusuf Munir, as Shakila mentioned, is one of the young activists working with the coalition in Cincinnati. So we can reach out to him if the youth are involved. CARE also is doing training for youth leadership. So there's a lot of organizations out there who are doing training. I think the youth are by far ahead of elders in the community in terms of getting there. Hopefully this is open to everybody and can get involved.
I just want to add, take advantage of your time that you have right now during this COVID to research those boards, ask those questions, call, because right now, obviously, people are not meeting, most likely. So, and they might be doing a lot of these types of video meetings. So this might be a good time for you to do that research.
Yeah, and actually people are meeting and they're meeting on Zoom. So for those
Zoom, right.
getting off work or, you know, commute time or whatever to meetings, this may be a way that you can at least shadow or observe some of the meetings and figure out if it's for you. I do want to make one reminder that the ICGC Civic Engagement Committee is involved with elections, voting, census, registration, this type of civic board engagement, as well as racial justice. Usually on Sundays, there's a program. Look out for those things in the newsletter and on social media. And then we again have Eid next week.
Friday, yeah.
Okay, so I want to wish everybody a happy Eid. And Shakila, are you aware of any upcoming community conversations that are going on?
There are a number of things. First of all, just to springboard off of, these civic engagement sessions are really to empower you within our community, is to allow you to have the information you need, the places where you need to be engaged in order to have the impact of your voice. Next Sunday at 4 p.m., we are going to be having a conversation with 4 diverse families about Eid, celebrating Eid, what's important, what it means. So it's really something we want to open up to everyone in order to share about the diverse cultures and heritages that make up our Muslim American community, but also how it is we can continue to live and celebrate the important holidays and meaningful things in our life, and continue to be engaged with one another in this pandemic world. I think, what was your question, Zeba? I was gonna.
That was it. Conversation. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, one last thing I do want to mention, that there are racial justice wise, there's incredible amount of work. So like I'm involved because of the Allergy and Asthma Specialty Center and the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Islamic Center. And they've been having police community conversations. And so I've gone to a couple of things where it was socially distanced. One of the African-American churches in the region hosted it for a conversation with the police. So, the work has not stopped. It's just being done in a variety of different ways. And so that's one of the conversations. I think they want to continue that and broaden it. And so I will make sure that, we keep our civic engagement team in the loop, and as well as other key conversations that are going on.
Okay. So given the time, it's almost at the hour mark. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, but feel free to continue sending questions through ICGC office, and we can follow up with this with more discussion or more in-depth topics. So I just want to thank Shabana and Shakila and Samina for hosting this, and hopefully it was benefit to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum.